We're officially just 1 week away from the start of the NFL regular season. The Philadelphia Eagles will take on the Washington Redskins, and the roster is set. 53 men who will charge into battle with the aim of bringing a second Lombardi trophy to the city of brotherly love have been announced, and so has the practice squad. At least 9 of the 10 spaces, there is currently 1 left vacant. So if you've missed any of the news over the past couple of days, don't fret. We're going to go into who's in, who's out, and just how dangerous this Philadelphia Eagles 2019 team really looks beneath the surface. Before we get into it though, guys, make sure you leave a like and hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. It would mean the absolute world to us, and I promise we are going to give you as much as we physically can between now and the end of the regular season. Thank you for joining us on the off-season roller coaster, but now the fun really begins and we're about to kick it to a whole other level. And as always, you can get daily content from myself and all of our writers at phillysportsnetwork.com. Let's kick things off with the most important position on the team, quarterback, and there are no shocks to be found here. Nate Sudfeld does make the week 1 roster, with the likelihood he may be IR stash if necessary. The signing of Josh McCown very much buys the Eagles time with Nate Sudfeld, not just from an injury recovery perspective, but from the fact that they still really don't know what they have in terms of are they ready to drop him into a live game situation with playoffs on the line that we almost had last year. We got a nice grading scale against Cody Kessler and he fared very well, so I'd say at this point he is a fringe backup quarterback, but that extra guidance from a 16-year veteran could be absolutely invaluable. As for Cody Kessler, his experiment was unfortunately short-lived as he failed to do anything remotely productive during the preseason, and Clayton Thorson will go down as a bizarre selection, a 5th round pick who to this day I believe should have been Eastern Stick had the Chargers not jumped up to snatch him from the clutches of Howie Roseman, but Thorson oddly ends up with the Dallas Cowboys of all teams, so I suppose it's a bittersweet ending for Clayton Thorson, but I'm sure that he's going to be a developmental arm for years to come. It's just a project that's a bit too steep for the Eagles. Overall, they've got Carson Wentz, they've got the insurance policy, and they've got the eventual heir to that QB2 throne, once again creating one of the most complete and dangerous quarterback rooms in the entire NFL. On to running back, and the LaShawn McCoy hype train came to a startling halt on Sunday morning as it was announced he signed with the Chiefs, but that shouldn't be any real surprise. The Eagles have a very complete position here. Jordan Howard should start out as a running back 1, or at least take the biggest slice of the pie, whereas Miles Sanders would probably be eased into the game, used in maybe those prolonged drives on screens, swings and outside looks, with Howard focusing much of his attention up the middle. Darren Sproles of course has his niche role and value on special teams, and Corey Clement showed more than enough during 11-on-11 action and a limited burst of preseason excitement to prove to the Eagles that he hasn't lost a step, that he has overcome those injuries, and he's ready to pick up where he left off. Ultimately, this was always going to be the case for running back. It could have easily been Boston Scott in the place of Darren Sproles, but why go for baby Sproles when you could just have the original? Interestingly, Wendell Smallwood ends up in Washington of all places, and Josh Adams reunites with Joe Douglas under the guise of the New York Jets. Donnell Pumphrey is probably just out of the picture at this equation, although the Eagles do have a spare spot on their practice squad. Who knows what kind of player is going to fill that, but overall you've got the best of everything from this backfield. You've got yourselves a powerhouse running back 1, an elusive running back 2 with such little tread on the tire he's basically brand new. Darren Sproles to just come in and give you that burst on 3rd down, maybe on mesh and sit routes that we've seen the Eagles use plenty of in recent years, and then Corey Clement to fill in if needs be. This is a great positional look for the Eagles, very little to be concerned about here. Onto the offensive line, and you will struggle to find a position on this team that demonstrates Howie Roseman's culture of building a locker room from the ball out than this very one. Just look at the amount of depth you've got here. Beyond the starters, beyond Jason Peters and Lane Johnson, the fact that you have got a 1st round pick in Andre Dillard, a right tackle that has played left, right, and is now going to be your starting guard in week 1 should Brandon Brooks not be able to go in Halapoulivaati Vaitai. The team then keep Jordan Mailata, not wanting to expose him to waivers after a relatively strong preseason, and then you've even got someone like Matt Pryor, who despite a penalty played preseason still remains on this team, and that to me just says the Eagles don't want to give up on their draft picks too soon if they can help it. We saw the same with Wendell Smallwood. It's commitment, it's only his 2nd year. Pryor's got versatility given that he played every spot along TCU's offensive front during his time as a Horned Frog, and I think the Eagles just want to coach that mental discipline aspect. The surprise here is that Nate Herbig makes the roster over Stefan Wisniewski, but if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I've been preaching that's probably the case for quite some time. Wiz has been on a decline since that Super Bowl winning start, and it's no fault of his own really, but he couldn't get the long-term deal he wanted, and upon returning back to the Eagles, he was then pushed inside because Halapoulivaati Vaitai, of all people, was snatching those right guard snaps away, and at centre, it was a failed experiment. Nate Herbig is younger and offers more upside, and Wiz probably won't be called into action if Vaitai can bridge the gap between now and the offseason. Also missing out, Brett Toth got poached by the Arizona Cardinals. It's hard to imagine he wanted to go there and would have much rather have stayed with the Eagles, but even so, it's nice to see him stick on an NFL roster, and Sua Opeta returns to the practice squad. Overall, this is still one of the most dominant lines in the entire NFL. Tight end was a bit of a surprising one this time yesterday. There was only Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert on the final 53, and that's still the case, but the Eagles did bring back both Joshua Perkins and Alex Ellis onto the practice squad. Now at face value, the fact that Ertz and Dallas Goedert are both contenders to make a Pro Bowl in 2019, there is no denying that, is absolutely huge for the Eagles, but if one of those guys goes down, they need to make sure they've got an insurance policy, and I would not be surprised if we see a guy sent to IR, a player maybe sent on Phantom IR, or even waived later on just to make room for one of those players, whether it's Josh Perkins or Alex Ellis, to step up onto the final 53. I don't think rolling into week 1 with just 2 active tight ends is a wise idea, but having said that, even if you add a third one, this is still an elite group. It's an elite receiving tandem of tight ends. All you've got to do is add an inline blocker, find out an extra position where you can maybe cut a player or stash someone away on IR, and that is instantly one of the best tight end groups in the NFL, because the versatility and the efficiency as receivers that you have, especially down in the red zone, is just going to be unmatched. Let's move to wide receiver, and again, this is another one of those groups where it is just among the best in the NFL, and it has been all off season long. The fact the Eagles were able to retain Nelson Aguilar and his $9.5 million cap hit, and then add Deshaun Jackson, and then draft JJ Arcega-Whiteside behind Alshon Jeffrey is just absolutely outstanding. The one question of the offseason had always been, who is going to be wide receiver 5, and will there be a 6th name in the mix? Ultimately, Mac Hollins was the answer, and again, it goes back to what I said earlier. The Eagles want to make sure they're really getting the most out of their draft picks and not giving up too soon. Now, Greg Ward Jr. did pass through waivers unclaimed and is back on the practice squad, which is huge from a talent evaluation perspective. It means that not only are there millions of receivers in the NFL, speaking literally not figuratively here, but it means that they can stash Greg Ward and keep Mac Hollins, who instantly does provide that special teams value. And I've been one of Hollins' maybe biggest critics, but also one of his biggest praises. I wrote an article earlier this offseason saying that Hollins could be the solution to a big slot receiver. If you remember, before the draft, the Eagles were working out 6'5" receivers, players like Jalen Hurd out of Baylor, and instead they took JJ Arcega-Whiteside with that WR1 potential. I think Hollins at 6'4", who averaged over 17 yards per reception at UNC, was a 4-year special teams captain during his time at UNC, maybe just has a little more special teams upside and fits the bill of a big slot receiver down inside the red zone. Do not be surprised to see Hollins working out of the slot this season, and maybe even in formations with Jeffrey and Jackson as well. Now, I would have personally liked to see Marken Michel here. I think he gives the Eagles that Golden Tate type of player that would have been very useful on screens and swings and making the most of open space, but that's not the direction the team wanted to go, and given the special teams value that Hollins brings, I can understand why, although in my hypothetical dream universe, it would have been Michel sneaking on as a WR5 or 6. Overall though, again, not much to complain about here. Defensive tackle for me is one of the only positions on the team where there may be a slight depth issue, and that's only because we don't know the extent of Fletcher Cox's injury. He's only just started doing sprints over the last couple of weeks, has missed all of preseason, and has been fairly absent throughout training camp, but it's not really a massive reason to be concerned. The more pressing issue here is there is a slight lack of depth. Now, keeping 4 defensive tackles is fine, but we know how much Schwartz likes to rotate that, so do expect some movement. It wouldn't surprise me to see Bruce Hector, he was recently assigned to the practice squad, called up to that final 53. Now Malik Jackson has had a quiet offseason, he didn't really show much or flash during camp or preseason, but Timmy Jernigan is playing with the biggest chip on his shoulder I've ever seen. The man is fuming over the fact that that monster contract has been ripped away due to an injury. He's now back for essentially pennies in comparison to the thousands he was making before, and he's now out to make a statement. So with that, and of course that 7th round trade that saw Hassan Ridgeway join the Eagles from the Colts, it's a very complete unit, but if one of those guys goes down, the last thing the Eagles want to do is really start wearing down Fletcher Cox, who is one of the most expensive contracts on the team. We've already seen the extent and the damage that such a long and grueling season can have on him. They need to take that pressure off. That's why they went out and got Jackson. That's why Jernigan's back. The star power is there. I don't think the depth is there just yet, but could easily be fixed with one call up to Bruce Hector. But if we're really saying that Bruce Hector's the difference between a good and an elite defensive tackle group, it's probably a good sign that this is already one of the best positions on the team. There is no doubting that these are 3 potential Pro Bowl players in Cox, Jackson and Jernigan, and they are going to wreak havoc in 2019. The pass rushers on the outside are an intriguing batch to say the least. Deshaun Hall makes the roster after blowing preseason opponents out of the water, and it's safe to say there would have been a mutiny and riots had he not made that final 53. But what's intriguing here is his position on the team. It looks as though the Deshaun Hall, the former 3rd round pick, is going to be taking that edge 4 spot away from Josh Sweat or Sharif Miller. Now, I like that move. I think it's safe to say that he has shown way more this preseason than either Sweat or Sharif Miller, but it is a slight knock in confidence for the 4th round pick last year, who most of his action came against the New Orleans Saints. Sweat did look good against Taylor Lewan, but after that, absolute radio silence. There has to be more from both Sweat and Sharif Miller, although we don't really want to put a lot of expectation on Miller as a 4th round pick with quite a marginal skill set as of right now. He's going to take some time to develop, and if Josh Sweat was allowed a year and allowed that kind of growing room, we have to afford that to Miller as well. Overall, there is a slight reason to be concerned that beyond those top 4 guys, depth is going to get scary, and there may not be the production late into games given how much Schwartz likes to rotate these guys, but this is all hypothetical and we may end up being very pleasantly surprised. It's nice to see Deshaun Hall make this roster. I think the big name here though is that we're going to see a very different Vinny Curry, someone that's coming back into this team after a year away in Tampa Bay as a leader, the 2nd oldest among this positional group. He's got to step up as someone to lead those young guys, to really nurture that growth and help them the best as he can as a veteran on the team. Curry has long been a player that can put the cake in the oven, make it perfectly, but just can't seem to ice it at the very end, and that has to change in 2019 if this positional group has any hope of overcoming its depth shortcomings. Linebacker was one of the most hotly debated positions on this team, and it's easy to see why. There is a good chance here that Camu Grugier-Hill is going to be placed on injured reserve, and that's going to allow one of the following linebackers to step up. Whether it's Nate Jerry, LJ Fort or TJ Edwards, one of those trio is going to have to step to the plate in wake of Camu Grugier-Hill. But the real debate here came between who makes the final roster, Alex Singleton or TJ Edwards, and the two went hammer and tong, back and forth. Anything you can do, I can do better. Singleton had 15 tackles, but Edwards is 3 years younger, brings a little bit more defensive upside as opposed to just a special teams prowess. The good news is though that after all of the panic in recent days, Alex Singleton is signed to the Eagles practice squad. So he declined the CFL interest in hopes to remain in the Eagles roster, knowing fully well that he's only one injury away from breaking onto that 53. The other name that a lot of people are criticising here is Nate Jerry, someone that has moved from a hybrid safety to outside linebacker, then what appears to be outside to middle, someone that's bulked up 30 pounds in the last 2 years. That's gonna be a tough transition for anyone to make, let alone learning all the intricacies of becoming a Mike linebacker. So from a depth perspective, it's almost like you've got two at each spot. Nigel Bradham on one side, lightly joined by LJ Fort. In the middle would be Zach Brown joined by Nate Jerry, and then on the other side, Camu Grugier-Hill and TJ Edwards. That's a very strong linebacking group and one I project a lot of big things for. It's underrated. I just think Nate Jerry needs time to really grow into that body of a Mike linebacker as well as the position itself. On to cornerback, and the question on everyone's lips is how in the world is this going to play out in terms of a depth chart, and that's a great problem to have. The one thing to bear in mind though is that with Orlando Scandrick released, there's a good chance that Crayvon LeBlanc gets placed on injured reserve and the team bring back the veteran who recorded 13 passes defense for the Chiefs last year, a career high for the savvy nickel corner. But the main questions again are over the depth chart. It is Ronald Darby or CB1, will Sidney Jones play inside or outside, and where does Avonte Maddox play as a result? There's a whole different discussion to be had around this position, and you'll find plenty of content over the next few days really diving into it. I don't think Jalen Mills makes it back off the PUP list, or if he does, he may even be released because he's certainly not taking snaps away from Rasul Douglas, at least in a dream scenario, and I don't think he's going to be challenging Sidney Jones anytime soon, given the fact the Eagles have already invested a second round pick into him and he's entering his third year. Mills isn't contractually tied to the team, he's in his contract year, he hasn't played all training camp. I don't think the future outlook is that bright for him at all. In terms of the released guys, no real shocks there whatsoever, but this depth chart itself is very young, very raw, with a lot of potential. It's just about harnessing that into actual turnovers and production. An area outside of Rasul Douglas was very weak for the Eagles in 2018. That has to be an area of focus. And finally, the safety position, one that went woefully unattended during the NFL draft, but since then has been a real area of focus, at least for the short term. Going into 2019, take all the contracts and all the other stipulations aside, you've got Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod, two Pro Bowl level safeties, manning the backfield, and behind them, Andrew Sendejo, who came off a career 2017 season to have his 2018 cut short. He now lands on a prove-it deal with the Eagles, as does Jonathan Cyprien, who had an ACL tear in 2018, but prior to that, had 4 separate campaigns of over 100 plus tackles. That's a very strong veteran-led group, and further attesting to that is Rudy Ford, a man who was initially traded for Bruce Hector, who somehow ends up on the Eagles practice squad, so more Howie magic there. But Ford will replace Trey Sullivan and DeAndre Hall. The two of those guys combined for 13 special teams tackles, over 60% of special teams snaps, and with Blake Countess leading the Rams in special teams tackles in back-to-back years, he was absent, he was injured, and the Eagles lost that special teams injection from a safety spot. So look for Rudy Ford, who has 422 special team snaps to his name, to take that on as his responsibility and very much be the Chris Maragos of that group, just a pure special teams captain. But moving forward, there's definite concern here. Malcolm Jenkins hasn't had his big payday, Rodney McLeod is on a reworked deal, and the two veteran signings are only on 1-year deals, so there is definitely a lot of transition at safety. You'd like to think the Eagles will challenge that in the draft and free agency next year, but that is way down the line. All that matters is 2019, and as a group, this is very, very dangerous. And finally, the 10-man practice squad, which is technically only a 9 now, and look at the amount of familiar names. All of the names people worried about wouldn't make this team are typically landing here. Alex Singleton, Alex Ellis, Boston Scott to name but 3, Greg Ward Jr. as a 4th, Sua Opeta is a huge get as a versatile guard, and the 2 new faces, Carl Lauletta, someone who was a 4th round pick of the Giants very, very recently, had a great preseason, 4 touchdowns and no interceptions, and Marcus Green, a 6th round pick this year, who has special teams value as a kick returner. That's a great group, and there is still room for flexibility moving in towards week 1 as well. But I want to know what you guys think. Is this the most dangerous roster in the NFL? Are there players you think should have made the team or maybe shouldn't make the team? Do you agree with me or not? Let me know down in the comments, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's video. From myself, Liam Jenkins, I'll see you next time.